I'm going to create a series of videos which will be covering the biomechanics and the kinesiology of walking. This first video is going to cover pelvic biomechanics. Then I will create some videos covering the kinesiology or the muscle contractions in the femur region, in the femoral region of the leg as we walk, as well as the biomechanics at the hip and at the knee. And finally, we will have some videos covering the kinesiology of the muscle contractions of the lower leg, as well as the biomechanics at the ankle. So as we move into the pelvis, I just want to mention, I hope one of my goals as an instructor to you as the student during this series of video is to hopefully convince you that walking is truly a controlled fall that is done repeatedly by the body. So the body is allowing for forward motion or forward leaning, and what we're doing is your body is just preventing you from falling to the ground every time by a series of coordinated movements and muscular contractions. And actually, our bodies become, as you know, very, very efficient and very proficient at letting us fall forward and controlling that motion and controlling the motion with as little energy as possible. So to start this video, as I mentioned, this short video is actually just going to cover our pelvis biomechanics. I wanted to start with the pelvic tilt. So I want to say a quick note before we really dive into this, just about these graphs. So as we go through these videos, you can interpret these graphs correctly and know kind of what we're looking at. When we look at these graphs are generally going to be divided into two planes. So this graph here is a sagittal plane, but it may be a frontal or a transverse. So in a sagittal plane, we can move anteriorly and posteriorly. So you can see that this graph is divided accordingly. 0 is going to be at neutral, where the innominants in the hip are going to be even. And then these researchers just gathered many, many people, and they brought them into the lab, and then they examined what they did at certain joints, or in this example, the pelvis. They looked at what they did, and they went ahead and recorded it. So on these graphs, you will see throughout the time, we're going to have this gray shaded area. This is the area that indicates the average as well as the error on either side. So this is giving us an indication of what the group did at any given time. So again, the average is going to fall right in the middle of this gray section. So for example, the average of this gray section, I don't know, it's probably 8. Yeah, it's 8 right there. So, but realize there's going to be some individual differences as we move through these graphs on either side of that. And that's what these graphs represent. And then a final note is just realize each of these graphs are going to move through the gait cycle in the same direction. It's going to be following this dark leg, or I think that's the left leg, as they move through the gait cycle. So we're here in initial contact. We move through loading response and into this mid stance, moving now into a terminal stance here. We get to toe off or pre-swing into an initial swing, a mid swing, a terminal swing, and finally back to an initial contact. So it's just that same gait cycle over and over and over, and we're only going to be following one of the legs. So with that understanding, let's go ahead and look at the pelvis and what we actually do in the sagittal plane. So remember, I mentioned one of my goals is to help convince you that walking is a controlled fall. To initiate this fall, look at what every person did that was brought into these researchers' labs. Every person initiates that fall by anteriorly rotating their pelvis. So think of your pelvis as a big bowl. Think of how we can tip that bowl to the front or to the back, or anteriorly or posteriorly. So think, if you tip that pelvis or that bowl anteriorly, you're going to be shifting your body. Your entire upper body for sure, will be shifting anteriorly, right? You're initiating a fall. So every person tilted that pelvis anteriorly. The average was right here at an 8. Some people were as much as 12. Some people were probably down here, I don't know, probably at a 6 or a 5. But every person is going to have some anterior tilt as they begin their gait cycle and throughout the gait cycle. I think that's an important point to mention here. As the person moved through the gait cycle, they never actually come back here to posterior. they are always going to maintain that anterior pelvic tilt. Moving now into the frontal plane. So what does the pelvis do in a superior and inferior, or an up and down type of motion? So again, we're going to be following this dark leg, or the left leg. So realize here, we're at initial contact, and we're going to be moving into bearing the weight in mid-stance. Mid-stance is where that one leg is going to bear 100% of the weight. So as we move into mid-stance and terminal stance, look at what happens. Our weight-bearing leg is going to move superiorly, probably 5 degrees, 4 degrees, and then again with some air on either side. But each person, as they bore weight, they move that hip superiorly. As they transfer the weight to the other leg, you'll notice that this hip is going to continually drop, 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 until now the left leg is in the swings, right? So we're here in toe off or initial or pre-swing. We move into initial swing, mid-swing, and terminal swing. As we are in the swings, look at how that hip actually drops in an inferior direction. And then as we move up to initial contact, it's going to come back up. And then it's just cyclical, over and over. So realize we only tracked the one leg, right? We only did the dark leg. If you were to plot the right leg, it's going to do this exact same thing, just at the opposite times, right? Because when it's bearing weight here, it's going to be up. And when it's not bearing weight and it swings here, it's going to be down. So good. And we said about 4 degrees. So the drop is not large, about 4 degrees. The superior direction is also not large. I'd say it's probably 5 or 6, probably a little bit more than the drop, but again, still not huge. So that's what we're doing in the frontal plane as we walk along. This slide here is just demonstrating that pelvic drop, so that 4 degrees of drop that we experience as the leg is unloaded, right? So the weight is going to be borne here on this right leg, excuse me. And so we're going to have that 4-degree pelvic drop. This slide also indicates, look at what happens as we bear weight on the leg. We're going to shift our mass, the majority of our mass, over that leg, right? And that should make sense as you pause and think about it, or as you go and walk a couple steps as you're watching this video, right? You're going to shift the majority of your weight over that weight-bearing leg because we don't want to fall, right? We don't want to just tip over and fall. So that way, hip is going to drop. As it drops, we're going to shift the weight over. So moving down, this is just words explaining what we just kind of talked through with that lateral pelvic shift and a vertical pelvic shift. So we're going to move up and then we're going to move laterally, right? One thing that I didn't mention that I'll take the time to mention here, realize when we move up, we're actually moving up quite a bit. And this slide here will help demonstrate that. When this hip moves up, as it bears weight from here to here, right, we're going to be moving that hip up. You actually have quite an amount of displacement. And if we did not absorb the shock throughout the rest of our body, our eyes would actually bob up and down as we walked. And you can imagine how funny that would be if you take a second and walk really stiffly and you try to imagine what the world would look like as we bob up and down. It would actually not be very fun, right? It's not very efficient. And so our body has adapted some mechanisms so that we actually keep a level plane at our eyes, but while the pelvis is moving this up and down direction. Lastly is the pelvic rotation. So this is in the transverse plane. So now imagine cutting your body through the pelvis. Now we're going to be looking at this internal and external rotation, so how that body shifts in the transverse plane. Again, if you pause and think about this, I think you should begin to see that this is intuitive. I mean, we all walk, well, not everybody walks, but in this class, you guys walk. You guys are familiar with walking. It's something that happens all the time, right? So think, when you hit your initial contact on this leading leg, we show here that you're actually going to have that pelvis internally rotated, right? Because you're on the leading leg. The lagging leg will be behind, right? So it's going to be externally rotated. So as we move through walking, we're internally, now we're bearing weight, we're moving towards neutral. Here at a terminal stance, we are neutral in the hips, right? You can see that they're even. And then as this dark leg becomes the trailing leg, it's going to externally rotate. And now this white leg would have been the leading leg, so it's going to be internally rotated. Anyway, hopefully that doesn't, we'll just stick with this dark leg. So the dark leg is now externally rotated. And as we move that dark leg from becoming the lagging leg to the leading leg, again, it's going to go from external back to internal, and then cyclical on through, over and over. So we have about 4 degrees. This is on that pelvic rotation. We're going to experience about 4 degrees on either side as we move through that internal-external rotation. Again, look at the variation here among some people. Look at how quickly some people become neutral in their hips. And they will experience little internal rotation as they move through their gait pattern. Okay, so we get here to the end of this. So what we're essentially doing, if we combine our sagittal, our frontal, and our transverse planes into a 3-dimensional look, what we're doing is we're creating a sinusoidal pattern. I still don't know if I said that right. We're moving our hips from up, or from down to up. We're going to be moving them from internally to externally rotated. And hopefully now you can begin to visualize that. I found a video here, and I slowed this down so that we can take a second and appreciate this. This is looking at the pelvis from the front here, from the back, and from the side. And it's going to be looking at those motions as the pelvis moves through walking. Okay, so notice, right, we're going to be experiencing some of that lateral shift. I'm going to back this up again. We're going to experience some of that lateral shift. We're going to be experiencing some of that up and down, right, that we talked about in the frontal plane. So we're moving up, we're moving down, we're moving up, we're moving down. We're shifting from side to side. We're going to be internally and externally rotating. It's really tough to see this here. You might see it a little bit there on this pelvis. That might be the best place to kind of see that. You can see it here a little bit. Internal, external rotation, right? And then it's going to go back the other direction. So I thought this was a nice video to help demonstrate this pattern now that we're going to experience of this up and down, this side to side, and this internal and external rotation that the pelvis is going to experience as we go through walking. So just one more time, and I'll let this play through the 2 seconds so you can kind of see it. Up, down, in and out, side to side. I want to look at one more video here of someone actually walking in real time. I like this video because I thought that we can actually appreciate this person as they walk through in slow motion fairly well. So I want you to notice here, look at the hips. That we have this drawing on here so that we can see how the hips are moving up and down. See, they drop, and then they come up. Now they're up, they're bearing weight, right? And then they're down, they're not bearing weight. Now they're up again as they'll start to bear weight. So you can see that pattern. Remember, this person is going to have an anteriorly rotated pelvis as they move through walking here. They're controlling their fall forward. And these motions here at the pelvis, again, this is helping us to accomplish efficient and competent walking patterns. So that wraps up this video on the biomechanics of just the pelvis.